March 21st, 2005. A day that began like any other in northern Minnesota, ended as one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. In a remote Native American reservation town, a troubled teenager carried out a massacre that claimed the lives of 10 people, including himself. It was a tragedy born from isolation, grief, and inner demons, leaving a community already scarred by poverty and despair to grapple with yet another devastating wound. NTHE Red Lake Indian Reservation sits deep in Minnesota, a place both beautiful and desolate. Vast forests stretch endlessly, dotted with lakes that shimmer in the summer sun but freeze solid in the harsh winters. Life there is defined by the land, the seasons, and the struggles of a community often overlooked by the outside world. The reservation is home to the Red Lake Band of Chippewa Indians, a proud people with a long history, but one whose modern-day existence has been marred by hardship. High unemployment, poverty, substance abuse, and limited opportunities had created a heavy atmosphere of despair for many families. NFOR 16-year-old Jeffrey Weiss, the reservation felt less like home and more like a prison. He was a tall, lanky teenager with dark, brooding eyes and a reputation for being quiet, withdrawn, and deeply troubled. His childhood had been marked by trauma. His father had taken his own life after a tense standoff with police. His mother was left severely brain damaged in a car accident, requiring long-term care in a nursing facility. With his parents gone from his life, Jeffrey was bounced around between relatives. Eventually, he came under the guardianship of his grandfather, Darrell Lucier, a respected tribal police officer. On the surface, Jeffrey's life might have appeared stable under his grandfather's roof, but inside, he was spiraling. He struggled with depression and had been placed on and off antidepressant medication. He was bullied at school, ridiculed for his appearance, his quietness, and the fact that he was different. Online, Jeffrey created a darker persona. On internet forums, he called himself Todesengel, the German word for angel of death. He posted disturbing messages about school shootings, expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler, and even shared graphic drawings of violence. Behind the screen, Jeffrey's loneliness and resentment hardened into something more dangerous, a fascination with destruction. March 21st, 2005 was supposed to be a normal Monday. Students at Red Lake Senior High School returned from their weekend ready, or reluctantly so, for another week of classes. Outside, the cold wind blew across the frozen reservation, carrying with it no hint of the carnage to come. At his grandfather's house, Jeffrey sat alone, plotting what he had long fantasized about. Around 2:45 p.m., he retrieved a Glock pistol and a shotgun from the home, weapons his grandfather legally owned as a police officer. He walked into his grandfather's bedroom and shot him twice, killing him. Then, with chilling calm, Jeffrey turned the gun on his grandfather's companion, Michelle Sagana, and shot her dead as well. After murdering the two people who had given him a home, Jeffrey donned a black trench coat, black pants, and boots. He strapped on a bulletproof vest and slipped headphones over his ears. Blasting music, as he prepared to bring his private fantasies to life. At around 2:49 p.m., he climbed into his grandfather's squad car, armed with the shotgun, the Glock pistol, and a .22 caliber pistol. Lights flashing, sirens silent, he drove toward Red Lake Senior High School. NTHE school was just beginning its last class period of the day when Jeffrey arrived at 3:02 p.m. Parking the squad car outside, he stepped out wearing his trench coat, his face set with determination. The sight of a familiar police vehicle brought no alarm at first. But within seconds, gunfire shattered the calm. Jeffrey shot and killed the school's unarmed security guard, Derek Brunn, just inside the entrance. Brunn was a beloved figure, a friendly presence who greeted students every day. That afternoon, he became the first to fall. Jeffrey pushed deeper into the school, firing indiscriminately. He entered a classroom where students were working quietly and opened fire. Panic erupted. Desks toppled, papers scattered, and screams echoed through the halls. Some students dove to the floor. Others scrambled to hide. He killed 5 students: Chase Lucier, 15, Chanel Rosebear, 15, Alicia White, 14, Dwayne Bugs Lewis, 15, and Thurleen Stillday, 15, each cut down in a place that was supposed to nurture them. Teacher Neva Rogers, 62, tried to shield her students but was killed as well. Several others were wounded, some critically, their young lives forever changed. NTHE rampage lasted roughly 10 minutes, but for those inside, it felt like hours. Teachers rushed to lock doors, to barricade classrooms, to call 911. Students cowered in corners, praying it would end. The sound of gunfire ricocheted through the school's hallways, each blast a reminder that death was only a wall away. Outside, police arrived quickly, drawn by frantic calls and the sight of the squad car in the parking lot. Officers stormed the building, weapons raised, hearts pounding as they searched for the source of the shots. They found Jeffrey in one of the hallways, exchanging fire with police. As bullets flew, the teenager realized his assault had reached its end. At approximately 3:12 p.m., Jeffrey Weiss turned his Glock on himself and pulled the trigger. Just like that, the boy who had turned his pain into violence ended his own life, leaving behind devastation and questions no one could fully answer. In the aftermath, the school was left looking like a battlefield. Blood stained the linoleum floors. Backpacks lay abandoned in the chaos. Windows were shattered by stray bullets. The bodies of children and a teacher were carried out one by one, draped in sheets, as sobbing parents and community members gathered outside. 10 lives were lost that day. 7 students, a teacher, a security guard, and Jeffrey's grandfather. 9 more people were wounded, some left with permanent injuries. It was, at the time, the deadliest school shooting since Columbine. NTHE Red Lake community was plunged into grief. Already weighed down by hardship, the massacre felt like a cruel blow from which it might never recover. Families mourned not just their loved ones, but also the sense of safety that had been stolen forever. Vigils were held, songs sung in Ojibwe, Candles lit in memory of the children whose laughter would never again echo through the reservation. Tribal elders spoke of healing, urging the community to come together to resist the pull of despair. But healing would be slow, the scars deep. Investigators pieced together Jeffrey's life, searching for signs that might have prevented the tragedy. His writings painted a chilling portrait, a boy consumed by darkness, fascinated with violence, and deeply resentful of the world. His admiration for Hitler and other mass killers revealed not just a disturbed mind, but a dangerous fixation. Mental health professionals later said Jeffrey had shown signs of major depression and suicidal ideation. He had been hospitalized in the past, but treatment had not been consistent. His isolation, combined with the easy access to firearms through his grandfather, created a deadly storm. The Red Lake shooting sparked national conversations, though briefly overshadowed by other events in the news cycle. Some focused on gun control, pointing to the tragedy of a teenager armed with police-issued weapons. Others highlighted mental health, arguing that more should have been done to support a boy so clearly in pain. Within Native communities, the massacre reignited discussions about the unique struggles of reservation life: poverty, lack of resources, generational trauma that left so many young people feeling hopeless. NFOR survivors, life was never the same. Some carried physical wounds, scars that ached with every change in the weather. Others carried invisible scars, flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety that lingered for years. Students who were there that day spoke of guilt. Why had they survived when their friends had not? Teachers who tried to protect their students struggled with the memories of what they saw. Parents woke up night after night to the sound of phantom gunshots in their dreams. NTHE school itself bore the weight of memory. Hallways once filled with chatter now carried a heavy silence. Classrooms where children had died were repainted, reconfigured, anything to try to erase the horror. But memory is not so easily painted over. Every corner held echoes of that day. Every desk a reminder of a face that should have been there but was not. In the years since, the Red Lake tragedy has faded from national headlines, eclipsed by newer, larger shootings. But for those who lived through it, it is as raw as ever. The names of the victims remain etched in stone, spoken in ceremonies, carried in the hearts of families who refuse to let them be forgotten. The survivors continue to tell their stories, hoping that by sharing their pain, they might prevent another tragedy. And March 21, 2005, was not just another school shooting. It was a cry from a place too often ignored, a reminder that pain does not discriminate by geography or culture. In Red Lake, a boy who felt invisible chose violence as his final statement. The cost was borne by children, teachers, and a community already struggling to survive. The question that lingers is one we have heard too many times before. How many more warnings will be missed before another classroom is silenced? On Valentine's Day, 2008, love and joy should have filled the air on the campus of Northern Illinois University. Instead, the day ended in carnage. A quiet lecture hall, filled with students preparing for an afternoon class, became the scene of a calculated massacre. In a matter of minutes, 6 young lives were lost, 21 more wounded, and the campus community forever scarred. Behind the horror was not just a gunman, but a story of a promising student's descent into darkness that few had truly seen coming. Northern Illinois University, located in DeKalb, was the kind of place where thousands of students pursued their degrees in the quiet Midwest, far from the chaos of big city life. On February 14th, students shuffled across the snowy campus, bundled in jackets and scarves, laughing with friends or clutching books against the cold. For many, Valentine's Day meant exchanging flowers and candy, or going out that evening to celebrate with partners. Others simply went about their day, focused on midterms, lectures, and papers. Few could have imagined that the day would become one of the darkest in the university's history. At the heart of what was to come was 27-year-old Stephen Kazmierczak. To many who knew him, Stephen seemed anything but dangerous. He had been an honor student at NIU, graduating in 2006 with a degree in sociology. Professors remembered him as bright, thoughtful, and passionate about his field. He was even awarded for his academic achievements and had once served as president of the university's Academic Criminal Justice Association. After graduation, he enrolled in graduate studies at the University of Illinois, continuing his work in sociology and criminal justice. He was described as respectful, polite, a student who asked good questions and seemed engaged. NBUT underneath that polished surface, Stephen was unraveling. He struggled with mental health issues, including a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. He had a history of erratic behavior and had once been admitted to a psychiatric hospital as a teenager after threatening self-harm. For years, medication had helped stabilize him. He was prescribed Prozac, Xanax, and Ambien, among others. Yet in the months before the shooting, Stephen stopped taking his medication. Friends and his girlfriend noticed changes, mood swings, withdrawn behavior, signs of inner turmoil. Still, no one could predict the scale of the violence he was planning. In the days leading up to February 14th, Stephen meticulously prepared. He purchased firearms legally, a Glock 9mm pistol, a Hi-Point .380 pistol, a Remington shotgun, and a Springfield 9mm handgun. He also acquired ammunition, body armor, and a holster. On the morning of the attack, he left his girlfriend a package containing several items: his antidepressant medication, 2 textbooks on serial killers and criminal justice, and a goodbye note. In the note, he apologized, telling her it wasn't her fault, and hinted at what was to come. At around 3 p.m., students began gathering in Cole Hall, one of NIU's busiest lecture halls. The room was large, seating more than 150 people, with stadium-style rows that faced a stage at the front. That afternoon, geology students were preparing for a lecture. Many were chatting with friends, scrolling through phones, or flipping through notebooks. The air was calm, ordinary. At 3:05 p.m., without warning, Stephen Kazmierczak burst through a side door onto the stage. Dressed in black, carrying his shotgun concealed in a guitar case and pistols strapped to his body, he immediately opened fire on the unsuspecting crowd. Students in the front rows were struck first as he sprayed bullets into the room. Screams filled the lecture hall as panic erupted. Some students dropped to the floor, trying to crawl under seats. Others scrambled for the exits, tripping over each other in the desperate rush to escape. NTHE gunfire was relentless. Stephen fired indiscriminately, reloading as he moved across the stage. Witnesses recalled the deafening blasts of the shotgun echoing through the hall, the sight of classmates falling in pools of blood, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. In the chaos, some students played dead, hoping the shooter would pass them by. Others clutched friends, dragging them toward the doors even as bullets whizzed past. And outside, students who managed to flee screamed for help, their voices carrying across the quad. People at first thought it was a prank, some kind of fire drill, until they saw the blood and the terror etched into their classmates' faces. Calls flooded 911. Police and campus security rushed toward Cole Hall, sirens piercing the winter air. And inside, the massacre lasted less than 6 minutes. By the time officers stormed the lecture hall at 3:12 p.m., it was already over. Stephen Kazmierczak had turned one of his pistols on himself, ending his life on the stage where he had begun his rampage. His body lay among the shell casings, and the chaos he had unleashed. NTHE toll was staggering. 5 students were killed almost instantly. 20-year-old Daniel Parmenter, a tall, gentle finance student remembered for his kindness. 19-year-old Ryan Mace, a psychology major with dreams of becoming a counselor. 20-year-old Juliana Gahant, a former Army corporal pursuing a teaching degree. 32-year-old Catalina Garcia, a hardworking student known for her resilience. And 20-year-old Gail Dubowski, a talented musician and devoted Christian. Dozens more were injured, some critically, their bodies shattered by gunfire. In the days that followed, another student succumbed to injuries, bringing the death toll to 6 victims plus the shooter. NTHE scene left behind in Cole Hall was haunting. Blood spattered across the lecture seats, notebooks scattered in panic, cell phones buzzing with missed calls from frantic parents. Survivors stumbled outside, their faces pale, their hands trembling as they recounted what they had seen. Police secured the building, their boots crunching over broken glass and dropped belongings, as paramedics rushed the wounded to hospitals. NFOR the families of the victims. Valentine's Day was forever transformed into a day of sorrow. Parents who had expected to hear stories of campus life and plans for the future instead received devastating phone calls. One by one, the names of the dead were released, each one a young life full of promise, each one now gone. Vigils were held on campus, where thousands gathered in silence, holding candles against the cold night air. The sound of sobs carried across the crowd as friends and classmates spoke of the laughter, dreams, and futures stolen in those 6 minutes. NA's investigators dug into Stephen Kazmierczak's life. The picture grew more complex. Here was a young man who had excelled academically, who had been praised by professors and peers, who seemed to embody the promise of higher education. Yet he had also carried within him a darkness few had seen fully. His mental health struggles, his decision to stop taking medication, and his fascination with weapons and violence converged in a perfect storm. The question that haunted everyone was why? Why would a man with so much potential, with opportunities ahead of him, turn his back on it all and choose destruction? NTHE-NIU shooting reignited national debates about gun laws, mental health treatment, and campus security. Many asked how someone with a known psychiatric history could legally purchase multiple firearms. Others pointed to the stigma around mental illness, the lack of consistent treatment, and the warning signs that had gone unnoticed. On campuses across the country, drills were implemented, security tightened, counseling services expanded. Yet for NIU, the changes came too late to save their own. And Cole Hall, once a hub of learning, became a symbol of tragedy. For months, the building was closed, its doors locked, its rooms silent. Students avoided walking past it, their eyes drifting away from the windows that had witnessed such horror. When it eventually reopened, it was redesigned, the lecture hall that had been the scene of the massacre torn out and rebuilt as a new facility. The hope was to give the space new life, to overwrite the pain with something constructive. But memory lingers. For survivors, no redesign could erase the images seared into their minds. Survivors of the attack carried both visible and invisible scars. Some faced years of physical therapy for gunshot wounds. Others battled nightmares, flashbacks, and survivor's guilt. Counseling services became lifelines, yet healing was uneven, a long journey that some would never fully complete. Families of the victims fought to keep their children's memories alive, establishing scholarships, foundations, and memorials in their names. They spoke about the need to remember not just how their loved ones died, but how they lived, their dreams, their kindness, their unique spirits. In the years since, the NIU shooting has joined the tragic litany of mass shootings in America, often overshadowed by later massacres with even higher death tolls. Yet within the NIU community, it remains a defining wound, a reminder of how quickly life can be shattered. Each Valentine's Day, ceremonies are held to honor the victims, their names read aloud, their faces remembered in photographs that never age. 6 minutes. That's all it took to transform a lecture hall into a place of horror, to change the lives of hundreds of people forever. For the victims of Northern Illinois University, their stories ended on a cold February day, but their voices still echo in the halls of memory. They are reminders of promise unfulfilled, of futures stolen, of the fragility of safety in a world where violence can erupt at any moment. And they leave us with the same haunting question: how many more classrooms must be drenched in blood before we finally learn? April 2nd, 2012. In the heart of Oakland, California, a small Christian college devoted to nursing and theology became the stage for an unspeakable massacre. A disgruntled former student, filled with resentment and rage, walked onto campus armed with a handgun and unleashed terror inside its classrooms. By the time the gunfire ended, 7 innocent lives were taken, 3 more were wounded, and a school that had promised hope and opportunity was left with blood on its floors and grief in every corner. Oikos University was not the kind of place most people noticed. Tucked away in an industrial section of Oakland, the modest building served a tight-knit community of students, many of them immigrants from Korea and other countries, drawn by its focus on faith and nursing programs. It was a place where people came seeking second chances, education that could lift them into new careers and better futures. The classrooms were small, the environment humble, but the mission was earnest, to provide knowledge and spiritual guidance in equal measure. NBUT for 43-year-old 1L Go. Oikos had become a place of humiliation. Born in South Korea, Go immigrated to the United States as a young man and eventually enlisted in the Army. His time in the military was short-lived. He never deployed overseas and was discharged before completing his service. Afterward, he drifted through life, struggling to find stability. He enrolled at Oikos University in 2010, hoping to earn a nursing degree. Yet his time there was marked by failure, and classmates and instructors remembered Go as awkward, socially isolated, and often disruptive. His English was weak, his grades were poor, and his behavior made others uncomfortable. He had angry outbursts in class, clashed with teachers, and was frequently absent. Eventually, he withdrew from the program in 2011. But leaving Oikos did not end his resentment. It deepened it. Go believed he had been disrespected by the school, ridiculed by classmates, and unfairly treated by administrators. In his mind, Oikos became the enemy, the source of his failures, the place where he had been denied dignity. And at the same time, Go's personal life was collapsing. His brother had recently died in a car accident, a devastating blow that seemed to shatter what little stability he had left. He was evicted from his apartment, living in cheap hotels, alone and consumed by bitterness. Former acquaintances recalled how he spoke of being mistreated, of people laughing at him, of a desire to make others feel his pain. He was a man drifting toward the edge, consumed by paranoia and rage. On the morning of April 2, 2012, Go carried a .45 caliber handgun and multiple loaded magazines with him as he drove toward Oikos University. He entered the school just after 10:30 a.m., wearing a jacket and carrying his weapon concealed. He made his way to a classroom where a group of nursing students were gathered for instruction. Without warning, he pulled out the handgun and began firing. In panic exploded instantly. Students screamed, some diving under desks, others trying desperately to flee. Ga moved through the room with chilling precision, ordering students to line up against the wall. Survivors later recalled how he seemed cold, detached, his voice calm, even as he pulled the trigger. He shot people at close range, executing them as if they were nothing more than targets. When some tried to hide, he dragged them out, firing without hesitation. 7 people were killed almost immediately. Among them were young students who had come to Oikos with dreams of becoming nurses, of helping others, of building new lives in America. Victims like 21-year-old Sonam Chodon, a Tibetan refugee pursuing her education, 24-year-old Doris Chibuko, a Nigerian mother of 3 hoping to provide a better future for her children, and 23-year-old Grace Yunhea Kim, a dedicated student whose faith guided her every step. Each life cut short was a story of resilience, of sacrifice, of hope. NA's gunfire echoed through the building. Chaos spread. Students in nearby rooms heard the shots and locked doors, huddling in silence as they prayed they wouldn't be next. Some jumped from windows to escape, their bodies crashing onto the pavement below. Others dialed 911, whispering frantically into their phones. Police received the first call at 10:33 a.m., reporting an active shooter inside the university. NBY, the time officers arrived. The massacre was nearly over. Gaw had fled the building, leaving behind a scene of carnage. Blood pooled on the floors, books and backpacks scattered in the chaos, the smell of gunpowder still hanging heavy in the air. Survivors stumbled out into the daylight, their faces streaked with tears, their clothes soaked with blood, their voices trembling as they told officers what had happened. Meanwhile, Go drove away in one of the victims' cars, but within hours his escape ended. He was spotted at a Safeway supermarket in Alameda, about 5 miles from the school. Calm and expressionless, he surrendered to police without resistance. In custody, he confessed to the shooting, offering chilling explanations. He said he was angry at the school, that he felt disrespected, that he wanted revenge for the humiliation he believed he had suffered. He showed no remorse, no sorrow, only bitterness. NTHE aftermath was devastating. Families of the victims gathered outside Oikos, clinging to one another as they waited for news. For many, the confirmation of death was like a physical blow, their bodies collapsing under the weight of grief. Vigils were held in Oakland and beyond, candles flickering as communities mourned the loss of 7 innocent lives. Investigators pieced together Go's troubled history. His academic failures, his isolation, his brother's death, his financial struggles, all had contributed to his descent into rage. But what struck many was how preventable it might have been. He had legally purchased the handgun used in the massacre, despite his erratic behavior. He had exhibited clear signs of mental instability, yet had slipped through the cracks of a system that should have intervened. In 2013, Go was declared mentally unfit to stand trial. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, noting his delusions and inability to understand the legal proceedings. For years, he remained in psychiatric facilities, his case stalled in limbo. Families of the victims, desperate for justice, expressed frustration and pain at the delays. They wanted closure, accountability, something to help ease the burden of their loss. In 2017, Go pleaded no contest to 7 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. NBUT for the families. No sentence could undo the devastation. Children were left without mothers, parents without children, communities without the bright young souls who had carried so much promise. Survivors carried deep scars, both physical and emotional. Some lived with bullet wounds that would never fully heal. Others endured nightmares, flashbacks, the sound of gunshots echoing in their minds long after the day had passed. Oikos University itself struggled to recover. The small school, once a haven for immigrant students, was forever marked by the massacre. Enrollment declined, resources dwindled, and in the years that followed, it faded from public memory. Yet for those who had been there, Oikos would never fade. The blood on its floors, the screams in its halls, the memories of friends and classmates murdered in cold blood remained etched into their lives. NTHE Oikos shooting did not receive the same national attention as other massacres, overshadowed by larger tragedies like Sandy Hook that occurred later that same year. But within Oakland, within the Korean-American community, and within the families of the victims, it was a wound that never healed. Each anniversary brought renewed pain. Each headline about another school shooting reopened the old scars. 7 lives stolen, 3 more scarred forever. A school that promised opportunity turned into a site of death. The Oikos University shooting may not be the most remembered tragedy, but for those who lived it, it is unforgettable. It is a reminder that violence can strike anywhere, even in the quiet corners of faith and learning. And it leaves us once again with the haunting question: how many more times must we tell this story before it finally ends? October 24th, 2014. Lunchtime at Marysville Pilchuck High School in Washington State. Students laughed, chatted, and gathered in the cafeteria, unaware that one of their own, someone they trusted, admired, even loved, was about to turn the familiar room into a place of horror. Within minutes, 5 young lives would be stolen, another forever scarred, and a community left shattered by betrayal. This was not an attack from a stranger. It was a massacre carried out by a smiling, popular teenager whose motives left behind more questions than answers. Marysville, Washington, is a quiet suburban city about 30 miles north of Seattle. With its modest homes, tree-lined streets, and a school system deeply tied to community pride, it was the kind of place where families felt safe. Marysville Pilchuck High School, a sprawling campus that drew students from the surrounding area, was known for its sports teams and strong Native American student population, particularly from the Tulalip tribes. On that autumn Friday, the air was crisp, the leaves orange and red, and students were already buzzing about the upcoming weekend. For many, it was just another ordinary day of school. For 15-year-old Jalen Freiberg, however, the day was anything but ordinary. Jalen wasn't the stereotype of a school shooter. He wasn't an outcast, bullied, or ignored. He was, by all appearances, one of the most popular kids in school. A freshman football player, homecoming prince, and member of the Tulalip tribes, Jalen had charisma that drew people in. Friends described him as funny, outgoing, and kind. He posted selfies on social media, smiled brightly in pictures with teammates, and often spoke about his pride in his heritage. To the outside world, he had everything going for him, but beneath that image was a troubled boy carrying heartbreak and anger. In the weeks leading up to October 24th, Jalen's social media painted a darker picture. His Twitter feed began to fill with cryptic messages, expressions of sadness, frustration, and despair. He wrote about betrayal, about feeling broken, about love that had soured. At the heart of his pain was a complicated teenage love triangle. Jalen had been romantically involved with a girl, but the relationship had ended, leaving him heartbroken. To make matters worse, two of his closest friends, people he trusted, had begun dating her. To Jalen, it was the ultimate betrayal. The combination of heartbreak, jealousy, and anger consumed him. He confided in some people about his struggles, but many assumed it was just normal teenage angst. No one imagined the darkness that was building inside him. On the morning of the shooting, Jalen seemed calm. He attended classes as usual, chatted with friends, and gave no outward sign of what was to come. But during first period, he sent a text message to several friends, inviting them to join him for lunch in the cafeteria. It seemed like a friendly gesture, the kind of thing a popular student might do to bring people together. None of them suspected it was a lure. And as lunch began, students flooded the cafeteria, their voices echoing in the large, open space. The smell of pizza and fries drifted through the air as hundreds gathered at tables. Jalen sat waiting at one of the tables, his friends arriving one by one, unaware that he had brought his father's .40 caliber Beretta handgun with him, hidden under his clothing. At 10:39 a.m., with his friends seated before him, Jalen pulled out the pistol and opened fire. NTHE first shots rang out sharp and shocking, cutting through the chatter of lunchtime. Witnesses described how Jalen's expression was blank, his movements deliberate. He shot 5 of his closest friends at point-blank range. Zoe Galasso, 14 years old, who died instantly. Gia Soriano, also 14, who would later succumb to her injuries. And Shaylee Chuckalnaskit, 14, who clung to life for days before passing. 2 others, Andrew Freiberg, Jalen's cousin, and Nate Hatch, another cousin, were gravely wounded. The betrayal was almost incomprehensible. He had targeted those he loved most. Nay's screams erupted in the cafeteria. Students scrambled in panic. Chairs overturned, trays crashed to the floor, and bodies slammed into doors as teenagers fled in terror. Some thought at first it was a prank, firecrackers maybe, but the sight of their friends bleeding on the floor shattered any illusion. Teachers rushed to lock classrooms, pulling students inside. Police received frantic 911 calls as chaos unfolded. Within seconds of the shooting, a teacher named Megan Silberberger confronted Jalen. Brave beyond measure, she rushed toward him, trying to stop the carnage. But before she could act, Jalen turned the gun on himself. A single shot ended his life there in the cafeteria, among the friends he had just gunned down. The entire attack lasted less than a minute, but its impact would last forever. NTHE aftermath was a scene of devastation. Students who had fled returned to find their friends lying in pools of blood. Emergency responders swarmed the school, carrying the wounded out on stretchers, performing CPR, and loading victims into ambulances. Parents raced to the school, their faces twisted in fear as they searched for their children. Some collapsed in relief as they found their kids safe. Others received the news no parent should ever hear, that their child was among the dead. The community of Marysville was plunged into grief. Vigils were held within hours, candles flickering against the darkness as students and parents embraced and wept. The Tulalip tribes, deeply tied to the victims and the shooter alike, were left grappling with unbearable loss. In many ways, the tragedy was a wound within a single family. The shooter and some of the victims were cousins, relatives connected by blood and tradition. The tribe struggled with grief on both sides, mourning the victims while also trying to make sense of Jalen's actions. Investigators worked to piece together what had led Jalen to commit such an unthinkable act. His phone and social media offered clues: heartbreak, jealousy, feelings of betrayal. But there was no note, no detailed plan left behind. It seemed the shooting had been both planned and impulsive, a desperate act by a teenager who saw no other way to express his pain. Experts debated whether he intended to kill all of his friends or whether he wanted to die in front of them, taking them with him. In the end, no clear answers emerged, only speculation. NTHE victims, families endured unimaginable pain. Zoe Galasso's parents spoke of her laughter, her love of fashion, her dreams of the future, all gone in an instant. Gia Soriano's family remembered her as bright and kind, a girl with a radiant smile who lit up every room. Shaylee Chucklenoskett's family grieved for their daughter, who had loved sports and carried an unshakable determination. Andrew Freiberg, though he fought for weeks in the hospital, ultimately died of his injuries, compounding the tragedy even further. Nate Hatch survived, though wounded both physically and emotionally, left to live with the trauma of being shot by his own cousin. NTHE school itself struggled to heal. Returning students were haunted by memories of that day: the sound of gunshots, the sight of classmates falling, the echoes of screams. The cafeteria, once a place of laughter, became a reminder of horror. Counselors were brought in, but for many, the scars were too deep. Teachers and staff carried their own trauma, some plagued by guilt that they couldn't do more to protect their students. And in the wider community, the shooting reignited debates about guns, mental health, and the warning signs of violence. Some argued that the responsibility lay in the easy access Jalen had to a firearm, his father's gun, not properly secured. Others pointed to the struggles of adolescence, the intensity of teenage emotions, and the difficulty of spotting when pain turns into danger. The Tulalip tribes, in particular, faced the challenge of balancing grief and accountability, of mourning victims, while also confronting the fact that one of their own had caused the tragedy. Over time, memorials were built, trees were planted, plaques engraved with the names of the victims. Students who survived graduated, carrying with them the memory of friends who never would. Parents of the victims spoke at conferences and events, sharing their stories in the hope of preventing another tragedy. But for those who had lived it, the pain never fully left. The Marysville-Pilchuck High School shooting was not just a headline. It was a wound, raw and deep, that changed the course of countless lives. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this tragedy was the betrayal. This was not the story of a bullied loner lashing out at strangers. It was the story of a beloved, popular boy turning on his closest friends. The very people he claimed to love became his targets. That fact made the shooting harder to process, harder to explain, and harder to heal from. And 5 young lives taken. One survivor left with scars he will carry forever, and a community left to ask the question no one could answer. Why? Why would someone so loved, so admired, choose to destroy the very people closest to him? The Marysville-Pilchuck High School shooting was not just a tragedy of death, but of betrayal. And in its aftermath, it forces us all to confront the unsettling truth that sometimes the danger does not come from outside our circle, but from within it. October 1st, 2015. Roseburg, Oregon. A cool autumn morning, the kind that settles softly over the valleys and forests of the Pacific Northwest. At Umpqua Community College, students carried backpacks, laptops, and coffee cups as they moved between classes. It was the first week of October, a season of fresh beginnings for many, new courses, new goals, new friendships. But within minutes, that promise would collapse into terror. In one classroom, a 26-year-old gunman would open fire, executing 9 innocent people and injuring 9 more before taking his own life. It would become one of the deadliest mass shootings in Oregon's history, and yet another scar in the unending story of American school shootings. Umpqua Community College sat on a hillside just outside Roseburg, a small city of about 22,000 people. Known for its timber industry and rugged beauty, Roseburg was the kind of place where people still left doors unlocked and neighbors waved as they passed. Umpqua was not a sprawling urban campus. It was intimate, quiet, and tight-knit, with fewer than 4,000 students. For many, it was a gateway, a place where working parents, veterans, and first-generation college students could build toward a better future. NTHAT morning, English professor Larry Levine's writing class was gathering in Snyder Hall, room 15. Students shuffled in, chatting, some still groggy from the early hour. Among them was Chris Harper Mercer, a reclusive 26-year-old student who had enrolled in classes but rarely interacted with others. He had grown up in California, raised primarily by his mother after his parents divorced. Harper Mercer had struggled socially for years, bouncing between schools, grappling with depression, isolation, and fascination with violence. Neighbors later recalled how he kept to himself, his blinds always drawn, his presence almost ghost-like. Online, however, he was not silent. Harper Mercer frequented forums where he consumed and sometimes posted about mass shootings, expressing admiration for previous killers. He was particularly interested in the attention shooters received, the notoriety their names carried. In posts later uncovered, he hinted at his loneliness, his anger, his belief that life was meaningless. He saw himself as invisible and decided the only way to be seen was through violence. On the morning of October 1st, he carried with him an arsenal, 6 firearms, extra ammunition, and body armor. Most of the weapons were legally purchased, either by him or by his mother, who shared his interest in guns. He entered Snyder Hall wearing a flak jacket, his weapons concealed in a backpack. At around 10:38 a.m., he stepped into room 15, where Levine's students were already beginning their writing exercises. Without hesitation, Harper Mercer pulled out a gun and fired, striking the professor first. Panic erupted instantly. Some students dove under desks, others froze in terror, while a few tried desperately to run. Harper Mercer ordered the class to stay put. He began asking chilling questions: whether students were religious, whether they believed in God. Survivors later recalled how he would mock those who said yes, telling them they would meet their God soon before pulling the trigger. He executed students methodically, moving through the room as if performing a grim ritual. Among the dead were 18-year-old Lucero Alcaraz, a young woman with dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse; 34-year-old Jason Johnson, a recovering addict who had turned his life around and enrolled in college to build a new future; and 59-year-old Kim Dietz, a devoted mother who had returned to school later in life to continue her education. Each victim was a story of resilience, of determination, of hope. Each one ended brutally on the cold floor of room 15. NA's gunfire echoed across campus. 911 calls flooded dispatch. Students in nearby buildings barricaded doors, turned off lights, and hid in silence. Police raced to the scene, their radios crackling with reports of an active shooter. Outside, chaos unfolded as students fled in every direction, some sprinting across lawns, others ducking behind cars, their faces pale with fear. In the classroom, Harper Mercer continued his rampage. Some survivors remembered the eerie calm in his voice, the chilling deliberation of his movements. At one point, he handed a USB drive to one of the students, telling them it contained his writings and should be given to authorities. He seemed obsessed with being remembered, with leaving behind a legacy. His final act of violence was as much about being seen as it was about killing. At 10:44 a.m., just 6 minutes after the first shots, law enforcement stormed the building. A gunfight broke out between Harper Mercer and responding officers. Bullets tore through walls and shattered glass. Within moments, the confrontation ended. Harper Mercer turned one of his guns on himself, ending his life before officers could take him into custody. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the shouts of first responders rushing into the blood-soaked classroom. 9 people lay dead. 9 more were injured, some critically. Survivors stumbled out, their clothes stained red, their faces blank with shock. Medics worked frantically, loading victims into ambulances, performing CPR on the lawn, and trying desperately to save those clinging to life. Parents arrived at the campus within minutes, their panic uncontainable as they searched for their children. Some found them safe, trembling but alive. Others were directed to a nearby center, where the worst news awaited. NTHE community of Roseburg was shattered. Vigils sprang up within hours, candles flickering in the darkness, photographs of victims surrounded by flowers and handwritten notes. In a town so small, everyone seemed to know someone touched by the tragedy. Churches opened their doors, counselors volunteered their time, and neighbors clung to each other in grief. In the aftermath, investigators pored over Harper Mercer's belongings. His apartment was filled with weapons, ammunition, and writings that revealed his obsession with mass shootings. In a manifesto-like document, he railed against religion, against women, against society at large. He complained of loneliness, of being ignored, of living a life without meaning. He praised previous shooters, calling them martyrs, and made clear his desire to join their ranks. For him, this massacre was not just about killing, it was about forcing the world to remember his name. Nationally, the shooting reignited debates about gun control, mental health, and the role of media in covering mass violence. President Barack Obama addressed the nation hours later, his voice heavy with frustration. He acknowledged that once again, lives had been lost in a school shooting, and once again the cycle of outrage and inaction would follow. His words struck a nerve. Our thoughts and prayers are not enough. But despite his plea, little changed. NFOR, the families of the victims, the pain was immeasurable. Each story was a reminder of lives filled with promise cut short in an instant. Parents spoke through tears about the last text messages they had received that morning, about hugs given before class, about dreams that would never be fulfilled. Survivors carried scars both visible and invisible, haunted by memories of that classroom, the sound of gunfire, the sight of friends falling, the chilling questions asked before death. The campus of Umpqua Community College eventually reopened, but it was never the same. Snyder Hall remained closed for months, a silent monument to tragedy. Students returned to classrooms with fear lingering in their hearts, their sense of safety forever shattered. For many, the school was no longer just a place of learning. It was the site of nightmares. And over time, memorials were built, trees planted, plaques engraved with names, spaces created for reflection. But even as the years passed, the weight of October 1st, 2015 never fully lifted. Each anniversary reopened the wound. Each new school shooting across the country ripped it wider. The families of Roseburg became part of a grim fraternity of survivors, united not by choice but by tragedy. Perhaps the most haunting element of the Umpqua shooting was the killer's desire for recognition. He did not lash out blindly. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be part of a narrative of infamy. And in that lies the most uncomfortable truth, that while communities grieve, while families bury their loved ones, while survivors struggle to move forward, the shooters often get exactly what they wanted. Their names in the headlines, their stories retold. 9 lives stolen, 9 more scarred, a classroom turned into a killing ground, a community left to mourn, and a nation once again forced to confront the horror of school shootings. The Umpqua Community College tragedy is not just a story of death, but of obsession. The obsession of a man who wanted to be seen, no matter the cost. And it leaves us with a question that lingers long after the candles are extinguished. How many more times must we tell this story before something truly changes? February 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day. At Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, students carried roses and candy, laughter echoing through crowded hallways as couples exchanged notes and friends planned their evening celebrations. It was supposed to be a day of love, of teenage joy, of ordinary high school life. But by the end of the afternoon, Parkland would be known not for young love, but for death. A 19-year-old former student, armed with an AR-15 style rifle, walked into the building and carried out one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. 17 people would be murdered, 17 more injured, and a nation already scarred by gun violence would be thrust into outrage and grief once again. Stoneman Douglas was a sprawling, modern high school in an affluent suburb of Fort Lauderdale. With more than 3,000 students, its campus was buzzing with activity, sports teams, arts programs, and academic achievements that made it one of Florida's most respected schools. Parents chose Parkland for its reputation as a safe, family-oriented community, a place where kids could grow up shielded from the dangers seen elsewhere. But safety, as the events of that day would prove, was an illusion. NTHE shooter Nicholas Cruz was a 19-year-old former student who had been expelled the previous year for disciplinary problems. His life had been a story of instability from the beginning. Adopted as an infant, Cruz lost his adoptive father when he was young, and later his mother, who died suddenly in November 2017. Alone, emotionally volatile, and armed with a collection of weapons he had legally purchased, Cruz spiraled deeper into anger and isolation. Teachers and peers had long seen the warning signs: violent outbursts, disturbing social media posts, threats, but no intervention had ever fully stopped him. And on the afternoon of February 14th, Cruz called for an Uber to take him to the school. In his bag was a legally purchased AR-15 rifle and multiple magazines of ammunition. He wore a maroon polo shirt, the same color as the school uniform, allowing him to blend in as he entered Building 12, a 3-story structure filled with classrooms. At 2:21 p.m., just as students were preparing to leave for the day, he pulled the fire alarm. The shrill sound sent hundreds of teenagers into the hallways, exactly as he had planned. NTHE attack began almost immediately. Cruz raised the rifle and fired down the hall, bullets ripping through walls, doors, and bodies. Students screamed and scrambled for cover, some diving back into classrooms, others running blindly through the smoke-filled corridors. Teachers shouted for students to hide, pulling them into rooms, barricading doors with desks and chairs. In the chaos, surveillance cameras captured the gunman moving with chilling calm, methodically firing as he climbed the building's 3 floors. On the first floor, 9 students and 3 staff members were killed within minutes. Among them was 14-year-old Alyssa Al-Hadaf, a gifted soccer player with dreams of playing professionally, 15-year-old Peter Wang, who died while holding a door open to help classmates escape, and 35-year-old geography teacher Scott Beagle, who ushered students into his classroom, sacrificing his life to save theirs. The violence was relentless, but so too were the acts of bravery. Students texted parents goodbye messages while others shielded friends with their bodies, choosing to face bullets rather than abandon those beside them. As Cruz moved upward, the horror spread. On the second floor, he continued firing, striking more students before heading to the third. There, 14-year-old Joaquin Oliver, 16-year-old Carmen Schentrup, and others were gunned down in seconds. By the time Cruz finally left the building at 2:27 p.m., just 6 minutes after he began, 17 lives had been stolen, and the school was plunged into a nightmare that would never fully end. And outside, chaos reigned. Sirens wailed as police and medics swarmed the campus. Helicopters circled overhead. Parents gathered near the school, their faces etched with panic, begging for news. Survivors stumbled out, hands raised, their clothes stained with blood, their eyes blank with shock. Some wept openly, clutching friends. Others walked in silence, too numb to process what had happened. Inside the building, the dead and wounded lay in hallways and classrooms, surrounded by backpacks, papers, and Valentine's Day cards scattered across the floor. Crews blended in with fleeing students, slipping away unnoticed. He walked calmly to a nearby neighborhood, stopping at a fast food restaurant before being arrested about an hour later. Police found him carrying ammunition and wearing his school polo, his expression vacant. In custody, he confessed to the shooting, showing little emotion, as if the slaughter of 17 people had been nothing more than an inevitability in his mind. NTHE, aftermath of Parkland, was unlike any school shooting before it. The sheer scale of the violence shocked the nation, but what came after was even more significant. The students of Stoneman Douglas, many of whom had survived the attack, refused to be silent. Within days, they became the faces of a new movement against gun violence. Survivors like Emma Gonzalez, David Hogg, and Cameron Kasky spoke out on television, at rallies, and across social media, demanding change. Their grief turned to activism, their trauma into fuel for a cause. The March for Our Lives movement was born, drawing millions into the streets in one of the largest youth-led protests in American history. Students carried signs with the names of the victims, chanting for stricter gun laws, for accountability from politicians, for an end to the cycle of thoughts and prayers without action. For the first time in decades, the survivors of a school shooting became leaders in a national conversation, their voices powerful, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. NBUT, even as activism spread, grief remained. Families of the 17 victims mourned lives filled with promise. Parents spoke of empty bedrooms, of birthdays never celebrated, of futures stolen. Friends remembered laughter, dreams, and the little details, the way someone's smile lit up a room, the way another's ambition inspired others. Survivors struggled with survivors' guilt, with flashbacks, with nightmares that replayed the sounds of gunfire again and again. Teachers carried the weight of trauma, knowing they had done everything they could, yet still lost so many. NTHE trial of Nicholas Cruz dragged on for years, delayed by legal battles and the sheer complexity of the case. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to all charges, 17 counts of murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. In 2022, a jury recommended life in prison without parole rather than the death penalty, a decision that outraged many families of the victims. To them, justice felt incomplete. To others, the sentence at least ensured he would never harm again. Yet no punishment could undo the devastation. No courtroom verdict could bring back what was lost. NTHE legacy of Parkland is complex. On one hand, it became a symbol of youth-led activism, a moment where survivors channeled their pain into a movement that captured the world's attention. On the other, It was another entry in the endless list of American school shootings, another set of names added to memorials, another reminder of how fragile safety truly is. Stoneman Douglas High School eventually reopened, but the shadow of February 14th never lifted. Building 12 was closed permanently, a crime scene too painful to reclaim. Plans were made to demolish it, to erase the physical reminder of the massacre. But memories cannot be demolished. For those who survived, every hallway, every classroom, every sound of a fire alarm carried echoes of that day. Each anniversary brings vigils, marches, and moments of silence. Each new school shooting elsewhere reopens wounds, reminding survivors that the cycle continues. Parkland is both a tragedy and a warning, a story that demands to be remembered, even as the nation struggles to learn from it. 17 lives stolen, 17 more forever scarred. A school community shattered on a day meant for love. The Stoneman Douglas High School shooting is not just a story of loss, but of defiance, of students who refused to be silent, of families who demanded accountability, of a generation forced to grow up in the shadow of violence. And as we close this chapter, we are left with the same haunting question that has echoed through every story told here. How many more schools must become crime scenes before trust and safety is restored?